What I'm going to show now is a story called Marriage in the Middle of Ruins, which was made by Romanian participants, so its subtitles are going to play. This is one where the Romanians ran a sort of library association, ran an X Factor type competition where all the people who made stories submitted their stories to this national competition and they voted on them. This is the one that won the prize. It tells the story of, I'll play it and you can see the story.
Căsătorie printre ruine. 4 martie 1977, o zi ca oricare alta. A decurs în mod normal, până la orele 21:45, când un cutremur devastator de 7,4 grade pe scara Richter, epicentrul în județul Blancea, a schimbat în totalitate cursul vieții multor oameni. Consecințele grave, constând în deteriorarea multor imobile, atât din Focșani cât și în partea de sud a țării, în mod special în București, au provocat victime omenești, pierzându-și viața prin dărâmături, artiști consacrați ca Amza Perea, Doina Badea cu familia, cât și din alte categorii sociale. În orașul Focșani, clădirile vechi, care fusese afectate de cutremurul din anul 1940, s-au dărâmat cu preponderență în zona pieței centrale. Imediat, după cutremur, cu motivație, au început demolările masive în întreg orașul, schimbând în mod radical vechea arhitectura orașului prin construcțiile edificate ulterior. Atât familia mea, cât și a soțului nu au avut pagube materiale, însă spaima acumulată din timpul devastator prin cutremur și-a lăsat amprente psihice, întrucât pentru mine personal reprezenta ghinionul vieții ceea ce s-a și întâmplat. Având în vedere că depusesem actele la starea civilă pentru căsătorie în sediul primăriei orașului Focșani, actual clădirea din fața Poștei Române, am fost programați la data de 5 martie 1977 pentru acest eveniment, care în mod normal ar fi fost cel fericit. Din păcate, nu a fost să fie așa. Astfel, în dimineața zilei de 5 martie 1977, plecând de acasă, până la primărie am întâlnit oameni dezolați, pe a căror figuri se vedea tristețea și amărăciunea față de pierderile materiale suferite. Am rămas înmărmurită în fața primăriei, întrucât trupe de militari efectuau evacuarea bunurilor mobile, clădirea fiind foarte avariată, dar bunurile din holul principal era căzut, iar etajul, în proporție de 70% deteriorat. În fața acestei tragedii, am hotărât să anulăm căsătoria, ceea ce am și strigat cât mă țineau puterile, însă chiar și în aceste împrejurări am fost invitați într-un colț al holului pentru semnarea actelor, evenimentul principal amânându-se cu o săptămână. Încheierea căsătoriei s-a materializat cu fotografia de familie și prieteni în fața primăriei, observându-se urmările cutremurului prin scările rupte din fața clădirii. Aceasta este o poveste nu prea plăcută, care mi-a marcat viața, însă timpul a trecut, evenimentele s-au derulat progresiv, astfel încât efectele devastatoare au rămas într-un colțișor imprimate pentru generația noastră de pensionari, cei tineri, născuți într-un oraș nou, fiind privați de cunoașterea farmecului focșanului patriarcal de altă dată.
Some more story.
That's a long story.
It's a very powerful story, actually. I've gathered a number of those, a lot of those Romanian stories were very powerful. And one of the reasons that we wanted to work with older people was for the reason that you suggested, that we felt that the stories would be better, that they would lend themselves more to the form of the digital story, and that the work with the younger ones was kind of defined by their more limited life experiences in certain ways. A lot of this was influenced by writing on digital storytelling, of which there isn't an awful lot. It's kind of like, because it's a relatively new form, there's a growing body of academic writing around it. So Nick Coldry, who you probably heard of, is based at the LSE now, used to be boss at Goldsmiths. He's talks about digital storytelling and voice and as a means of empowerment and the democratic potential within digital storytelling and movements like it to liberate to provide new voices in the media and a greater plurality of voices and a rich democratic potential, not just digital storytelling, but other forms of practice. Anna Paletti, who's an English woman based in Australia, comes back to the question around the form of the digital story and the impact of the workshop on that form, and looks at how the short form, the 2 to 3 minute form, constrains what can be told within that space. And talks about how, it's not just the length, but it's also the fact it's anchored in a very personal story. There's only a certain amount that you can tell within that period of time. And you have to make a narrative that's both accessible and closed. So you can't end up with something like a piece of oral history which just kind of rambles on forever and ever and ever, but is something that has to have a beginning, middle, and end within that 2 to 3 minutes. And finally, Nancy Thunin in Leeds, who's written a really good book very recently about self-representation and new media. She talks, she's been spending a lot of time with people in Wales and talks a lot about the tension within these two sort of therapeutic, the therapeutic dimension of a workshop and building the confidence of the people, of the body of people within a workshop, and the democratic potential. And certainly as a facilitator, that's something that I feel is an interesting contrast between younger and older people. Younger people are much more open about saying things, and older people are slightly more reticent. So you find that people will say things in the workshop, particularly among the older group. They will say, I'll say that within you 8 or 12 people, but I can't possibly put it in public because the people on the internet will see it, and then it will go back to my family and they'll see X, Y, and Z happen. So you kind of find some interesting tensions and disparities there, where the younger people wouldn't have that problem. What we then tried to do with the work that we had in Romania, because we had this large body of stories, was to try to understand why the people were telling the stories and to focus on the specific stories. So we did 2 pieces of research. First, we did a sort of a survey where we surveyed all the storytellers, as many of them as responded. And secondly, we went back and we spoke to individual people about why they told particular stories. One of the interesting demographic things that I learned was the sense across Europe of what age actually means. If you're over 45 in Romania, they count you as old. If you're over about 75, 80 in Finland, they count you as old. And so there's a massive disparity across Europe. And partly that's to do with employability, because if you've lost a job at 45, 50 in Romania, you can struggle for work. These are the people that we spoke to. You can see the spike in ages, most of them were between 61 and 70. But there were younger people who would not be counted as old in for example, the UK. Most of them, because we were working through libraries, were well educated. So we had most of them had college education at the very least. We didn't have sort of people who were outside of that group. We asked them to rate the benefits of being part of a workshop or participating in it. And we expected, and our funders would have hoped, that they'd said that being able to use technology was the primary thing. They actually didn't. They said that the most important thing was to do something creative. That was the thing that came back within that survey, as you can see from the information that's there. As I said, we wanted to go beyond that and to look why they told particular stories. So I'm a bit worried I'm running out of time. We wanted to go. So we went back to the groups and we asked them these 4 questions: what their reasons were for telling a particular story, how important was it to say something, and how the format of the stories shaped what they actually said, and what were their experiences beyond the storytelling workshop. So these slides start to show and explore the quotes. These are taken from the Romanian participants that were in there. Show the importance. They show the importance of particular imagery. I made my notes in my notebook for these slides last night. It's been some time since we did this survey. And people were talking about the conservation and the preservation of the individual memories. They're talking about how the workshop used as a means to share individual stories within the group. And these were people from across the entirety of Romania. This is obviously, Foxani is the one that we just showed, looking at how the form shaped the story. And it's kind of interesting because older people have fewer images to choose from, and the images that they have are much more sort of focused, they're much sharper, so there's no sort of sense of like ubiquity of images that younger people would just bring a camera or a phone and load them all down onto the thing. But these people had a far fewer range of images to choose from to shape their story, and that gave them a particular focus. So the sense of having something to say and having a space to say it is a key part of the findings that we came through with this. This has been written up as a paper. It was written up about 2 years ago. Siver Stories, which is the successor project, it's funded through the Lifelong Learning Programme. Took the work on into 3 different elements. Firstly, as I said before, it's working with the active older people. Secondly, working with the inactive elder or the frail older. And we're particularly looking at developing work in both areas with higher education settings. So we're working with people who are looking at dementia and using imagery and storytelling as a means of and people not losing their memory, so it's kind of helping them as they develop that. And we also have work with community groups, so looking at the form, transferring it back into Romania, because the Romanian work has mostly been with older people, but transferring it back to us so that they can develop work with different community groups. As part of this, we've been working with SAHAR, the Salvation Army Housing Association. We've run 3 workshops with SAHAR, first in Goldsmiths in April, then 2 in Brighton, 1 in July and 1 in December. We've been working with young people and the residents, young people and their carers. So we're trying to train a network of carers who can provide digital storytelling workshops for these young people. SAHAR runs something called an open talent program, which is a sort of very interventionist approach to working with young people so that they can have a space to express themselves and their views, and they can gain confidence. We've created, as I said, some 55 stories, of which 25 or so are with these different groups of young people. And we've conducted, more recently, some interviews with the young people since the stories were completed. The intention is that those interviews will be balanced against the interviews that were completed with the Romanian participants, but we're still in the process of completing interviews with the young people from their program. We went through the same process, the same questions, why they chose to tell particular stories, the significance of an opportunity to speak, and the role of creativity and what they've done before since the workshop. It's one of the things that is really interesting is how these people have all gone on to do different things after the workshop. Some of the Romanian participants have created sort of storytelling clubs based in the libraries, and they're continuing to create and share their own digital stories, and some of them are using different forms. So there's a group in Constanta on the Black Sea who are trying to tell digital stories using haiku. So it's a very mixed collection of things that are taking place. These workshops, these are my colleagues in Brighton, working with the young people, going back to working with young people after stopping 6 or 7 years ago, it was quite difficult actually for those of us who were facilitators, because these were a very fragile, hard to reach group, lacking in confidence. That kind of gained through the process of the workshop, but it was clear that a few of them had come with very difficult stories to tell, And the kind of therapeutic aspect of the work very much came to the fore. The story circle that I was responsible for had 8 young people in it. By the end of the first day, and they were mixed boys and girls, 5 of them had been in tears telling those particular stories. What was interesting about those stories was that the people who actually were in tears told pretty much a story that they were in tears about earlier on in the day. They came thinking, some of them thinking they had got stories, some of them thinking they hadn't, but it was clear that their sort of self-esteem and the process of telling stories and being valued and having a peer group that worked with them was very important, and that kind of worked through. They let them sort of see a side of themselves that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. Each of these workshops ends with a screening, a sharing of the stories, and that's often the most cathartic point, because in this group that people had split into 2, and there was some sort of 20-odd people in each one. They come together and they share the stories, and then they're published on the web, and that process of seeing and sharing and collecting is very important for the individual digital storytelling. What it does is it also begs a question that is often posed at events like this, is how do you navigate your way around these stories, because there's a huge amount of them out there now. Across the world there's a large body of material that nobody really makes sense of, and how you can get to the process of beginning to even make sense of that. As a, if you type digital stories, you get loads of stuff coming out of Google. We wouldn't be able to navigate your way around it except in very isolated pockets, BBC's site and Acme in Australia, for example. As I said, with these young people, some of them have gone on to do quite impressive things since they've been in the digital storytelling workshop, and they have this girl here on this one, it's Lindsay. Lindsay has, since she's been on the workshop, she's set up her own business. She says she wouldn't have done that without the confidence that the workshop had done. Sahar have taken her under their wing, and they've paid for her to have driving lessons because they think that kind of brought her out of her shell. She sat there staring at her feet, didn't say much at all on the first day. And then, second day, third day, she made a film, which I'm going to play. She wouldn't speak, but she communicated through the music. She came there with no idea about what she was going to do, and I think she tells a story there. We're now we have our final project conference, which is in Portugal, and Sahara paying for Lindsay, who hasn't got a passport, we discovered last week, to go to Portugal to present her story to the 150 odd people in the final conference. So that will be played in the story. I'm kind of going to just go through the summaries that we've got. That there is an emphasis on closure, and the stories are very focused. And it does mean that they're actually limited in what they can say. And I think that's a problem with the form of the digital story. And it's evolving. There are people trying to find different ways of telling the stories, that they are not so workshop-based. And particularly we're doing one-to-ones now with some of the older people, so that we can kind of focus the stories within the space that they've got. And that's partly, again, because of the availability of the images that they've got. But I do think that you get something that's very strong, and it can be unique, because some of the ones I haven't played for you, and some of the ones that I have played, you're clearly getting a very distinct, unusual, personal voice coming through these. And if you take the first one, which was a commissioned piece from the States, that's just using the form. But as you're looking further on, even Jamie's story, which I agree is a polemic of sorts, but the other two are much more personal, and they are saying something, providing a voice that you otherwise wouldn't hear. There is a fear, I think now, particularly as we work with older people, about a fear of being too personal, and that is a difficulty within the form. I mean, I know when I've gone through the workshop myself, I kind of do feel I don't want to go there because I'm working with these people. But it does provide them with a space to create their own world in the way that Freeman talks about narrative and memory. And there is this therapeutic dimension to the work that is I think, increasingly coming through to the fore, not just with the work with the old people, but also with the work with the young people, people being very open to talk about things. And I think that as trainers, that places quite a pressure on you. You find yourself sitting there thinking, I'm not really trained to deal with the fact that this young person has had a tragedy in their lives quite recently, or this young girl has suddenly been reunited with her father, who she hasn't seen for 20 years. It kind of creates a pressure on you, and it puts you in a space that you're expected to deal with. It's quite difficult. The other thing we will continue telling more stories. Is there any questions or anything anyone wants to?
My background's in graphic design in some ways, so I was wondering about that aspect of it. How much of the sort of graphic content of it is also dictated? So obviously we've got this amount of images that's in it, and also and some people are choosing text and image. Is that very much depending on the facilitator, or how much of it's up to the participant? Where's the balance in some ways?
The facilitator sits back, and so it tends to be where the storyteller wants to go. And so your role as a facilitator is to kind of coax the story out as, of the people that you're working with. The one that Lindsay's story with the where she doesn't speak, that's very unusual. It's the only one of those we've got out of all of them that we've made. She's the only one who's actually done not spoken in her own voice. Everybody else has done that. But the remaining one, I think, shows the flaw of training people to do the editing themselves, who aren't necessarily editors, because she got terribly excited with the potential of the editing program. It's come whizzing round like it's nuts. And you would want to say, actually, no, can you sit back and let this thing breathe a little bit, but you can't.
Yeah, I guess it depends what your aims are in the workshop. It's not a graphic design workshop.
No, it's about voice and
so I know, even though from my perspective is what I'm, obviously I'm very opinionated on what good design is, but I quite liked that. I quite liked that it was clearly made by that person, and I thought that was quite nice about it.
And I think sometimes when you can see flaws in them, is a lot of the Sahara stories tend to end up with somebody saying how wonderful Sahara is, a bit like Lindsay's does. And that's fine, because she has had a really great experience with them. But it's a kind of like, it's the arc of the story always takes you towards how great Sahara is. There's another instance that fits into my mind. Somebody, a colleague of ours, works for the NHS, and they're making digital stories for the NHS. They've been commissioned by them. And they're very powerful, and they're used at board level meetings. So each time whichever health trusts they're working for have their board meetings, they will show a story made as part of this programme. Now, as part of that, the maker has had to take the story away, the completion of the story, to make something that's more polished, so it reaches that audience. And that's kind of part of the deal, but it varies, is the answer.
You were talking before that you've got all the stories, it's quite difficult to navigate them.
Yeah.
Have you got any plans on organising them in such a way that it would be easier to, maybe for people to have a point of access and then you can start to explore the narrative space you've created?
It's a question that keeps coming up. We would like to have something like that, a means to navigate your way around. And it would be a means to navigate your way around different digital storytelling projects. And there are 2 or 3 examples of very big ones, collections of them around the world. There's BBC's Capture Wales, there's ACME, Australian Centre for Moving Image, and then there's something called the Museum of the Person in Sao Paulo, which is trying to gather 1 million different stories of Brazilians from the city. What there isn't there isn't a sort of central means to move around them. And so there's there's those 3 big ones, and there's lots of scattered examples of storytelling practice. The project that we've been, colleagues across Europe have been trying to get is something that can act as a portal where you could navigate your way around that. It hasn't got anywhere, so if you have any ideas, we'd be welcome.
There's a lot of work in the field of interactive video and so on, which relates to this. They've been looking at tagging and automatic tagging, and then navigating through tags and so on. So there is that sort of related technological work which you might be able to draw on. You've seen the speech track on television doing subtitles, and you can see it makes silly errors every so often.
Yes.
It's not bad at giving you the sense of what's going on. Occasionally it gets a key word very wrong and you can't help laughing. But it is now good enough to be able to extract broadly what's going on there, enough correct words.
Does it
and then put us into these statistical systems and they will plus them for you.
This is actually how search generally works. I mean, if you Google search, you type the words in, and then it then relates that set of words to another set of words somewhere else, and get some sort of distance metric, normally using something called latent semantic analysis.
But also, as far as I can judge, it's also very important the gaze of the people who are conducting the project, because the gaze the people use, it's not, if they would have done it for YouTube or something, the result wouldn't be the same. So there is a kind of a wholeness which these people recreate. So in my opinion, it would be good to see what kind of wholeness is. Is it genre defined or image defined, or is it therapeutic one, or is it the kind of a historical archive?
Yeah, well that could be part of.
Yeah.